Um, so I'm really glad. I'm really glad to hear about your success. That's really good. Um, that one thing though, this is not um, mine or my technique, but rather this is stuff that's sitting right there in the suttas that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa pointed out, and so I go uh, very carefully by uh, how to say all of the details of the practice and the source of the practice and everything comes right out of the suttas. But that concepts, examples, and that sort of stuff comes out of my own experience, especially with psychology. And I tend to mix those two things in, but it's all based upon what is right there in the suttas. And what I find mostly with many of the Buddhist teachers is that what they are doing is teaching correctly. They're just not teaching completely.
How's that?
Uh, this was actually an idea of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa uh, uh, in the overall issue of a 10-day retreat. You see, most retreats are done kind of with the beginner in mind. And so when people take a number of retreats, they just take the beginner's course over and over and over again. And that what Bhikkhu Buddhadasa's idea was is to give the students in a retreat um, the whole path and sufficient enough so that they could go off and practice on their own, whether they have a retreat again or not, because they know what the path is. Now, it turns out that that's quite a lot of stuff to dump on people within 10 days. And so, what we've done with these video chats through Skype is to bring it back down to the way that it would actually be taught from teacher to student, one on one, taking the student where they are in the moment with the understanding of the overall practice. And as you probably heard me say, it is so unified that it can be boiled down to just three little words: dukkha, dukkha, nirodha. That the Buddha taught that I only teach this one thing, and that while most of us see it as kind of like a dial that we would turn down. Really, at any particular moment, it's more like an on off switch. You can either choose to be in your old bad habits or you can choose to come out of it. And so I'm glad to hear that you've been practicing choosing to come out of it.
Yep. Um, and more importantly than that, I guess it was, I have confidence that it'll be pretty consistent. Like it's within my reach. Before this, I used to get to these states, the joy and stuff, but it wasn't consistent. So I couldn't really, I didn't have the confidence that I'll at least know how to get there, right? But right now it seems like it's pretty consistent, and it's so consistent that I can get into these states even when I don't really want to. For example, if I'm lying down, I'm trying to sleep, I'll suddenly, maybe not as deep as it's during the sit, but it's pretty much the same state of joy and like vibrations over your body and stuff.
But that's exactly what the Buddha recommends, and we've got it right there in the suttas. In that regard, practicing wakefulness. You lay down to go to sleep, but there you are doing that, laying down exactly what you're very good at developing sitting up.
That is hard to sleep.
Uh, while that is true, um, for a while, because mindfulness actually, when you're really sharp and alert and laying there in bed and really enjoying it and taking deep breaths, yes, that is different from what most people do, which is worry and fret about what they've got to do tomorrow and think that they've got to go to sleep. The only real way that anybody's going to go to sleep is if they're tired. All right. But getting the mind in a good state when you go to sleep is a really good idea. Why? Because otherwise, then what we have is dream states. They call it REM for rapid eye movement. We can see the movements in the body. We can see dogs when they are having dreams. This is not a totally restful state. The Buddha, in fact, talks of it in the sense of burning by day and smoldering by night, which is what the humans do. But if you can get yourself into a state of being free from hindrances and laying there and just enjoying the night, then does it really matter as you drift off into sleep that it takes you 5 or 10 or 20 minutes to go to sleep? No, no, no. This is really pleasant anyway, and that you'll get enough sleep.
It seems
Because
like
if
just
you were asleep, you'd probably be dreaming anyway, and that's not such good sleep.
yeah, the number of hours that I need to sleep has reduced over the past week. I just feel far more well rested without sleeping the same number of hours. I don't know if that's because of this.
Right, but right now you don't have the means or the methods or the equipment to measure through the night what quality of sleep you were having. That in fact, in the really, really old days, they had to put someone in a hospital to be able to record that, which means now, how is your sleep at home versus just being in a hospital? And so they were not getting really good data. It's only when they could set up the equipment at home that they could really begin to understand the various sleep states, to where the Buddha had already experimented with that kind of stuff, that this is an old issue. That we're now just putting modern equipment to, but the quality of there's actually even recommended posture, which is to lay on the side. They call it the lion's posture or the lion's pose. No doubt you've heard of this. No? Well, it's not the pose of the Sphinx, where the Sphinx is up on his elbows. Okay, it's a laying down posture where you're laying on the side with your head propped up either by a pillow or part of the monk's robes. The monks would use that, or you can lay on your arm, whatever, like this. But the important thing is that if you're sleeping on your back, then your lungs don't get very well filled, and that it's also not comfortable. For some reason, people who are in a hospital, in fact, are laying on their back so that they can be worked on by the medical people, whether it's the best posture for the person or not, because they haven't really learned about that. But with this posture of laying on one side, we bend the knees slightly and then kind of lay one leg over the other. It's a very, very relaxing posture. And one of the things to do then is to check during the night to see if you're still laying on your side, and if not, to roll over and get back into it. So this is what you would call bedtime meditation, or wakey while sleeping, while sleeping. that in fact your quality of sleep goes very high with this. One of the reasons why especially old people feel really tired when they wake up in the morning, other than perhaps they've been doing some sort of drugs or alcohol or something, is because during the night, if they're sleeping in the wrong posture, they're not getting enough air. They're literally starving themselves while they're in bed. That especially is true when one's laying on the back. But even if you're laying on your chest, you're still prohibiting, because of the whole weight of the body is now on your lungs. So you need to find a posture somehow or another, one way or the other, so that your own, let us say, best terms with gravity as far as breathing goes. And so this is worthwhile maintaining through the night so that it gives you a good quality of breathing or of sleep, because you're breathing well, as well as intentionally doing it.
Yeah, I'll try that. I'll try. So you basically stay mindful of your posture and then slowly drift off into sleep.
Right. And reflect upon how marvelous this is, how really great things are, how nice it is to just lay there in the bed and it's just so nice. Okay, that's the kind of attitude of being completely at rest and successful, being really, really satisfied. Allow yourself to be in that deep, deep state of satisfaction.
I think there's no real need to generate satisfaction, right? As long as you don't crave for things to be different than how they are, that's the same thing as getting satisfaction, right? They are the same things.
Well, let us dance around the word so that we can get a closer look at it. In fact, the word that goes back to the Pali that I'm discussing, which is actually mentioned but not picked apart in the Anapanasati Sutta. So we're really close to home when we're talking about this idia and idiopada. Now, the idiopada means the bases or the foundations for the power, and that the foundations of the power are very basically the same things as the Eightfold Noble Path, especially the 4 items of Sati and investigation and putting right effort into it. Okay. And sometimes in some systems they talk about confidence also. So these are the basis of power, and the power itself, or the powers as they're listed, is not magical powers, but the power of the mind, and that satisfaction leads that list. But also on that list is an important one to look at just for as a foundation, is that we feel safe and secure. We're not in any danger or feeling any kind of panic at all. Nor are we having the kinds of thoughts that would lead to some sort of panic. So that we become completely at rest in the sense of safety and security. And then the next point would be looking at it as contentment. That we're contented, which means we're satisfied. Now, one of the ways of kind of overdoing that is the word satiation. And satiation means completely full up. An example of that is you go out with friends to, let us say, a free buffet barbecue. All you want to eat, and everybody eats their fill, okay? On the way home, one of the guys in the car says, "Oh, why don't we stop at Burger King?" All right, the answer is nobody wants to stop at Burger King. Think it over. Didn't you get enough? Aren't you already full? Haven't you already had enough? Aren't you satiated now? So this is the quality that we're looking for. Is this is satisfying or satisfactory because it's enough that my container is full, and everything else that's put into it is just going to overflow anyway. That there's no longer a hollow place to be full. So, and we're talking about in this present moment. We're not talking about a permanent thing. That's more of a concept. We're talking about the actual feeling while you're just laying there in bed and feeling completely satisfied. It also has the quality of feeling successful in the sense that you really like this state. You like that you can get into it and that you know that you can. There's that confidence coming back into it now as a kind of feeling of success. And this builds up on that issue of confidence more and more. You can see how all this stuff kind of runs and circles around it together. So that as then our joy increases, it increases in the way of satisfaction and success, the feeling of security and safety, and this word contentment, which can also be satiation. Except for the word contentment, they all start with the letter S, and so they should be easy to see member. But there is an additional one that goes along with that, and that one is the one that is almost the key. And the way that it's translated into English is the word wealthy. Wealthy is not a feeling that most people with a lot of money feel. They don't feel wealthy. They may feel rich. They may feel like they can buy people. But if you ask them, do they need and want more money? They say, sure, because they don't feel wealthy yet. So in that regard, wealth doesn't really have anything to do with money, but it does have to do with our attitude. Okay, the attitude, in fact, of a lion, the attitude of I've got all that I need, that my bucket is in fact, is full and flowing over. In a way of saying it, there is so much Dharma that there's nothing left to say except just Dharma. That's when it's flowing all the time. So when we get to that state, it's a process, but only because there's layers of it. The actual feeling you've already had. You know what I'm talking about. I'm just describing this kind of deep inner satisfaction is the word that's used. But you can come up with your own word. You can invent a new word for it. But these are the words that come to us from the Buddhist point, and the word satisfaction is kind of the key point. That everything is good. In the way of that satisfaction is in fact the opposite of dissatisfaction. And dissatisfaction is in fact dukkha, dukkha, and sukha. So by getting ourselves into a state of enjoyable satisfaction, guess what? We're out of dukkha right now. And that's really the whole point of the teaching of the Buddha, is figure out how to get out of that state of dukkha and then figure out how to stay in the state that is free from the dukkha, free from the hindrances. Including one of the ways to sustain that is by going to sleep while you're in that state, which is a much more healthy way of going to sleep than going to sleep with the ordinary hindered mind, which is going to continue the hindrances after one goes to sleep.
So the mind stays in that state throughout the sleep. If you,
I'm not going to guarantee anything about how the mind going to stay, but I would say that we have a better opportunity of being in a good state when we're asleep if we go into sleep in a good state. And that if we go into sleep with full of hindrances, worries, I got to get up in the morning, kind of what have I got to do tomorrow kind of thing, thoughts, then the sleep is not going to be as peaceful.
yeah, I can see that.
Okay. That's the whole point, is can you see that? If you can see it, then you begin to practice it. When you begin to actually see the benefits of it,
Yeah, I think I can see that at least in the daily life itself. There has been a significant shift where the technical term would be tanha, but it feels like dukha itself. I don't want, my mind doesn't want any of it. Like as soon as it sees that it's hating something that's happening right now, it just wants to get rid of it. It arises again and again after every few seconds, but I think it's starting to feel like it's overwhelming. It wants none of this tanha, craving, whatever stuff at all. So yeah, it's starting to build that momentum, especially because of the meditation sits. It's starting to flow into daily life as well.
that's exactly the point. And throughout the day, there are many things that you can do. That you have probably heard that the Buddha actually spoke of for postures. The reclining posture, which we've just been speaking about, the sitting posture that you have been practicing all along, but there is also the walking posture and the standing posture. But basically, that was about the four postures that were available when you didn't have furniture. Now that we have furniture, there's a whole wide variety of postures that could be mentioned that just simply weren't mentioned, because in those days they weren't worth mentioning. But basically, the Buddha was trying to cover all of the bases. And so that issue of posture, especially posture changing, is a good time to reflect or to wake up or to practice sati. So throughout the day, and since you've been already kind of mentioning it, I'll go ahead and give this to you because you've already gotten good success with the sitting posture. And so there should be times in the day that you can bring that back out again, several times a day, maybe 15 or 20 times a day. How will we do that? Well, we're going to use the chair as an anchor or as an aid to sati. So whenever you sit down in a chair, how many times do you sit down in a chair every day?
Just sit or
Yeah,
keep
you come from a standing position, you walk up to a chair, and you sit down in it.
60 plus times, I guess, 60, 100 times.
All right, that means that now we have 60 times a day to practice. 60 times a day just to sit down. Now, here's how we're going to do it. In the sense that when we sit down in a chair, we normally sit down with a bottom line thought of resting or of taking a load off the feet, is the way some people say. Well, we're also going to take this opportunity to take a load off the mind. And here's how we're going to do it. As we sit down, we're going to start taking deep breath, and we're going to throw out any and everything that we were sitting down for, including why we sat down, and recognize, no, right now we're just shutting down. We're letting go. We're dropping it all. We're going to come to a momentary state of satisfaction. We could even go so far as to call it a little nibbana. Just to sit and go, ah. Now, when you're good at it, you could do that with just an out breath as you sit down. But generally, it's best to practice it at least 3 breath cycles, so that you practice over and over and over again, come back to that state of satisfaction that we've been talking about. That, in fact, the Buddha recommends that in the sense of developing the skill of going into that state. So it becomes a skill of going into that state, and so now we've got an exercise to do it. You're saying 60 times a day. Wow, if that's 60 times a day, if it took 30 seconds to do that, how much is that? That's
1800 seconds.
Yeah, right. That's a lot. My math machine broke on me. Let me see if I can put it in order again. If it were if it took 1 minute, 60 times a day would be 60 minutes, which is a full hour. If it takes 30, then that means that it's only taking half that time, which would be 30 minutes a day. So you can get 30 minutes a day of practice in 60 half-minute cycles. Glad my math machine started working again.
So another way that I've been automatically playing around with maintaining this sati is, seems like my mind keeps the breath in background or even in foreground, even while talking or while doing something, and it seems to work almost as an anchor or an indicator for, is my mind craving or in dukkha right now. So it's basically the similar concept, right? You're keeping mindfulness or sati of a physical, a bodily function, and because of that you also get to know about your mind's, is it craving, is it in dukkha, is it happy, and then you can fix that.
Exactly. You are in fact kind of ahead of me in the sense that the questions that you're asking are exactly the questions that would be asked in a full-on investigation. And so that would be the right way of looking at it. In fact, that's one's right view, is to be in that kind of an investigation. And the more you are in that investigation, then the closer you're going to be into the state that we're talking about as you sit down. Because you have been investigating and you know that the mind is clear. Because you've been what we call also the term is on guard. To be on guard for the things that are wholesome and the things that are unwholesome. So wow, you're you're really going. That's great. I'm glad to hear that you're moving along like this.
Yeah, I think the sits do transfer pretty well out of the sit as well, and it's the same thing. It's almost like a ongoing meditation. If I have breath or the feeling of my feet in awareness, uh, compared to that, I can, using that as a reference point, seems like I can see that my mind is sort of closing in, which is, I guess, tanha or dukkha, whatever. And then as soon as I see that, it seems like it's a hindrance, and I just deal with it in the same way I would deal with a hindrance, basically seeing that it's not needed at all. It's going to cause me unhappiness, and so my mind gets rid of it straight away. And that's sort of like a real time thing that keeps on happening as long as I maintain mindfulness of the breath or of sitting or of something, right?
Right. Exactly so. Correctly so. So now your job is to start putting that to work throughout the day. And so we start to use various anchors. Okay. One of the anchors that I've just given you is the chair. Another anchor, and a very big, powerful, and important one, is our hands. To become aware of our hands, what our hands are doing in this present moment, and how they feel. And that in the sutta, the Satipatthana Sutta, it talks about using the hands for grasping, for reaching, for touching. It even mentions going to the toilet, taking a bath, cleaning, whatever the hands are doing, become mindful of what the hands are doing. And so, and that helps bring us back to this present moment, keeps us in the here now. Focusing on that part of the body alone helps us to be very much in contact with our body, very much in the here now. And so this is something that I give you that I would call it a toy to play with, rather than a dedication. That this is not something to become dedicated to, but just whenever you think about it, you become aware of what your hands are doing. But with this sitting down now, that's a little bit different because we're almost required or forced to think about it because we're actually doing that sitting down. And so that'll start building that whole practice up of coming back to the present moment, becoming quite pleased with the situation.
And so correct me if I'm wrong, but seems like in Sati Patana, or basically the first part of it, mindfulness of these bodily functions, is the point of it A, to build up Sati, and B, so that as soon as you notice that, you know what your mind is doing as well, and then you can fix it. Like, is the point of it to be aware of the third part of Satipatthana, which is your mind craving? Is it unhappy? Why is it unhappy? And you fix it.
You're asking an important question, but that this question actually has a process kind of an answer. And the way to start is that the breakdown that you were using was body, feeling, mind, and mind objects, the four of the foundations. I think that the Buddha did that only because that had already been very commonly done in India as the four elements of earth, water, fire, and air. And so he just took that as a natural progression. Whether or not they are all equal in weight or not is not important. But it is kind of useful to think about each one of them as having its own unique value, its own unique qualities to it, that if we develop sati in relationship to the body, for instance, then that's an enormous benefit for our ability, for one thing, of just allowing the body to become peaceful. Also to get in touch with the breathing and all kinds of the things that are associated with mindfulness of body. One of the ways of talking about it is that the body wakes up. It becomes vibrantly alive. In regards to perhaps when a person's in a normal body state, it's kind of easy for someone to sneak up behind them because they're not paying attention. But if our body awareness is strong, when someone approaches us from behind, we have a feeling that we need to turn around and take a look at. So we can actually develop that through waking up the body and having sensations of the body. Now, The same thing is with feelings. And in fact, by being able to wake up the body, which is actually an easier process to do, we now can become alert to deep underlying feelings. Most important would be the uneasiness that comes from fear, that there's just a little bit something not quite right yet. All right. So, when we're practicing Anapanasati the way that you're thinking about practicing, or the way that we're talking about it now, is that now you can become aware of those tiny little things, because they will, in fact, grow to the point of taking you out of a state of satisfaction. So, in order to maintain satisfaction, we got to get pretty well in contact with these feelings that arise. So, so there's more relationships between the feeling and the body, but much of the emotions that people feel have bodily components, and that the way that we feel oftentimes affects the health of the body. Which means that if we feel good, then the body will feel strong. If we have the attitude, I can do this, then the body is going to respond to that. But if we have the feeling or the thought pattern that is associated with, wow, that's just too much work. Now, when we get up to do that work, the body actually responds by feeling bad, by feeling heavy, by feeling unable to get up and do the work. So there's many, many things like that. Another one would be how the feelings affect the mind. It affects the mind really strongly when someone is angry. If someone's angry, they can't think very well. So when two people get in a fight with each other, they can't maintain the present. They've always got to go dig up something in the past, kind of because it's easy to remember. But meanwhile, there have been many, many famous occasions and situations like debating teams, formal debate societies. You cannot do ad hominem attacks, because if you attack the guy personally, that'll get him angry, and then he gets to focused on defending himself rather than focused on defending his position. You can see it in wrestling. If the boxer can get the other boxer angry, then he will start making the mistakes. Same thing is true with karate and whatnot. That's kind of why they try to bluff their way into it, make them afraid before the fight starts, because you can get your opponent riled or upset or afraid of anything, then you can take advantage of him. So this is well-known stuff. I mean, people do it just naturally. But now we're really pointing out, yes, your feeling system will affect your body, and it will affect your mind. But the mind also has an effect upon the body. I see you, Mara. Aha, I can gladden it, so I can gladden the mind, which will gladden the feelings and relax the body. And so they work together in this way.
Yeah.
So when we begin to see in that relationship how they work together, then we can appreciate why it's useful to pay attention to each one of the individual parts to find out what's going on with that. That in fact, in the Anapanasati Sutta, step number 5, 6, 7, 8, step number 8 is about looking at the mental conditioners, which is in fact the feelings, to see how the feelings condition the mind. The step before that, though, is the ability to see this conditioning of feelings as they arise, so that we can begin to control them, so that you can then begin to feel the way that you want to feel. And now that you've gotten to the point that you can begin to feel the way that you want to feel, now we're going to work on having that happen more and more often, so that you can begin to feel the way that you want to feel quite often throughout the day. Literally going in the direction of every time you remember. Every time you remember, you can pop right out of that hindrance and right into a state of well-being.
Yeah, that's a good practice. I'll start doing that. Like at least while sitting and while doing something with my hands, just maintaining that mindfulness. Okay. Yeah.
All right. So now we've got something to play with this week.
Yeah. Also, coming back to the sits, I had 3 questions regarding my current sits. One of them is um, like where should I focus once I start getting into these joyous states and so on? Because yeah, that's somewhat confusing. Should I stick with the breath or should I focus on the feeling of pleasure and happiness that's arising? Because seems like if I
The
accidentally
answer is yes, and both. That inside of every breath, there is a lot of time, especially now that the breathing is deep and getting long, that there's quite a lot of time to happen between the in and the out breath. And so the way that we look at it then, and the way that it's stated in the suttas, is all you need to do is note one time during the in breath that this is a long in breath, and to note one time during the out breath that this is a long out breath. The rest of the time during that breath is there's a lot of room for other things. And one of them is for hindrance to come back in and rob you of the remembering the next thought. All right. So once we get into a state of joy and satisfaction, basically now the job is to learn to maintain it. That's the new job. First job is getting into it. The second job is to learn to maintain it. How are we going to maintain it? By preventing anything that would take us out of it from happening. So now we're going to guard the mind to make sure only wholesome thoughts come in and unwholesome thoughts are not allowed. This is the basic way that we begin to do it. So in fact, what you're doing is that you're only going to let a few select thoughts in, and most of the herd is not going to be allowed in because they might be dangerous. Thoughts of the past, thoughts of the future, all of that kind of stuff, we begin to inspect every thought to make sure that it passes muster. Otherwise, it gets that, aha, I see you, Mara, and out you go, and we want to catch it so quickly that it doesn't actually rob us of the state of satisfaction that we're in. And that's how we learn to maintain it.
So I guess the question um, is more about the amplitude of the happiness, because I've practiced this past week was maintaining it, and I've been able to maintain it for like 45 minutes consistently. And seems like the happiness goes through phases as well, where for the first 15 minutes it's pretty high and there's a lot of vibration, then goes down to a bit more just being content and being like having a little Buddha smile, and then it goes into just quietness, like nothing's happening, feels like I'm drowning in water and I don't need to do anything. But
Yes.
but the amplitude seems to change depending on whether I'm focusing on just the breath and the body, or if I'm focusing on the emotion or the pleasure. If I focus on the pleasure, the amplitude rises up. So what should I be focusing on, not from a point of view of length of maintaining the joy, but from a point of view of how deep the concentration is?
The answer to that is to take it laterally rather than the way that you're looking at it, and say that your job here is to do an investigation, including the investigation of all of these states. which means that in fact one of them is not better than the other because they are all free from dukkha. They all pass the muster, but they all still need to be investigated. And that you're actually beginning to learn to do that. This is good. This is very good that you can learn to control the intensity of it. But normally, what we tell students is, don't be too worried about the intensity. Just maintaining it is the goal for a while. But the intensity will also vary depending upon conditions. Well, now you've got that variance, and you can start to investigate the conditions. But one is not better than the other. So you're asking me which? The answer is investigation of all of it is the best way of doing it. To figure out how can you get it up, how can you get it peaceful, how can you do this? Because the more you are able to practice and investigate, the more control over it you'll gain.
Should I be looking to get into a flow state? Like, so once
Sounds like you're already in a flow state.
that flow state isn't so strong that I cannot focus on anything else either. It's more like if I want to, I can stick with the breath forever. My thoughts start to
You
point
want to keep your awareness open. You don't want to get sucked down a rabbit hole. All right. And the way that I'm also referring to it, that's not so derogatory, is that the first jhana is what we're talking about here. And getting too focused on something is the higher jhanas. We don't want to get too focused. We want to be open, not closed. We're looking for, on a camera, a fisheye lens, not a telephoto lens. We want it to be open. We want to be able to get part of the breath and watch that. We want to get to the feeling. We want to be able to watch how the mind works. We want to investigate these various states of sukha.
But isn't the first jhana a lot more unstable for this investigation? And for me personally,
no, this is exactly what the first jhana is. If it's too stable, you can't do the investigation. That's like putting the camera in a box or something. It can't see very well. You can experience, but there's no way of learning anything. We need to be able to have the mind working so that we can make sense out of what's happening.
which one is the first jhana? I see there's one where the joy rises suddenly and it almost feels very strong. But for me, that joy.
Wait a minute. Let's talk about what the factors of first jhana is, because intensity of feeling is not derivative at the boundaries of jhanas. That the intensities will be high in one case and then high in the other case for different reasons. So don't look at for basically the better way of doing it is, instead of thinking that you know what's going to happen, continue to investigate. So when I use the word first jhana, you already brought in your understanding of first jhana, which now clouded the issue. I'm sorry I said anything. But now that I mentioned it, we got to go for it, all right? The first quality of the first jhana is that the mind is in this moment free from hindrances. We got that free from hindrance by, I see you, and disassociated and separated ourselves from the hindrances and threw them out. Also, that gladdening of the mind occurs, and that gladdening of the mind then gets us set for the feeling of satisfaction. When we have that, and we also have the attitude of success, that's what gives rise to the quality that's called piti, which is the joy or the satisfaction of the success of that we've gotten rid of the hindrances. We can do that. We can actually begin to control the mind. And later on, we began to gain great joy in the fact that we can control the mind. It's really based in this quality of success. And with that feeling of piti comes the sukha, the opposite of the dukkha, which means satisfaction. Satisfaction comes with success of a job well done. And at this moment, the job that needed to be done has been done. The war was fought, the war was won. All right? What was the war? Getting the mind free from hindrances. And the better we practice at it, the easier that task is, and the more joy we can take over the fact that we could do this fairly successfully often.
So which one for piti?
This is now what we have. We have piti, we have sukha, and we have separation from the hindrances. These are three factors of the first jhana. What's your question?
Like which one's the piti, which one's the sukha? I see two emotions. One is this sort of almost excited joy, which is like it builds up, but it goes down within a few seconds, and then it's more like a flowy in a swimming pool.
You could say then that one way to help you understand it, you could say that uplifting joy is the piti, and then that satisfaction is the sukha. And that it's expressed in the description of the first jhana and in the Anapanasati in that order.
Yeah,
but there is a deep reference or a connection between piti and sukha to the point that one could be a substitution for the other. That in fact the word piti is used and translated as joy in the 7 factors of enlightenment, but in fact is really talking about both of them joined together, piti and sukha. So these are the 2 factors that arise because of the freedom from the hindrances. Seclusion from the hindrances is the way that it's normally described. Now, the next point is that if we're taking Anapanasati seriously and taking a few deep breaths, we've now gotten the frontal cortex going, which in that regard would mean what Bhikkhu Buddhadasa says is a mind fit for work, which now means we're adding 2 new factors beside the first 3, and that is a mind that we can apply to something. In other words, we can think the thoughts we want to think, and we can keep thinking the thoughts that we want to think. Applied and sustained thought now gives exactly the same reference in the description of the first jhana to look at sustaining the sukha that they're talking about in the Anapanasati Sutta. The way that we maintain the sukha is by guarding the mind to make sure that unwholesome thoughts don't come back in to rob us. So now look at it. We're doing body, we're doing breathing, we're watching the feelings, we're getting the feelings very excited in one case, and then we're getting very settled down, while at the same time, we're watching the content of the mind. So in a very, very short loop, we're looking at the whole of the Satipatthana.
With each breath, in and out breath, you're pretty much looking everywhere.
With the whole show. Mm-hmm.
And doesn't piti just die out after 20, 25 minutes on its own? Like the vibrations, whatever, tingly sensations throughout the body.
I don't know. I've never sat down with a stopwatch.
Because with me, it seems like the excitement dies down, but the sukha remains. Then it becomes a lot more deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just
yes, that's the normal process.
But would that mean I'm out of the first jhana because there is no piti now? Should I try to get it back?
No. In fact, no, not at all, because the piti is in fact the vehicle for the sukha. and that you can get this, you can get the piti back again fairly easy if you want it. The important point is the satisfaction of the job well done. The satisfaction of doing a good job and making the mind fit for work. So now we're going to apply the mind on the Satipatthana, but most especially on the mind's thought process, to make sure that any of the thoughts that we have are not going to pull us out of this state of sukha. So the kind of thoughts that we can have in that state would be, oh, wow, this is so nice. Oh, I like this. Oh, what a good breath this is. Ah, oh, I can feel the wind on the arm, or pulling the covers over the head. Oh, that feels so good. Okay. So it's all talk about this present moment and our experience of this present moment are the right kind of thoughts to start with, so that we can get into that state of feeling really good and talking to ourselves about how good this state really is. So these are the kind of thoughts that we would want to have. Now, the kind of thoughts that we don't want to have are the kind of thoughts that are going to pull us out of this. And boy, is that a long list of stuff. Like beginning to want something, or beginning to think about things that happened in the past, like what happened during the day, or like thinking about thoughts about what has to be done tomorrow, or any of those kind of thoughts would be the kind of thoughts that would be on our list of unwholesome thoughts. And therefore, as soon as we figure that out, we want to throw that thought away, even if that thought has already pulled us out of sukha. At whatever point that we catch it, that's Sati. Thank you, Sati, for coming back and saving my mind from that thought.
But so this leads me to the final question that I had. Then how am I supposed to do these insight or whatever practices, discernment, if I shouldn't allow craving and stuff to arise? Because what I really want to focus on is how does the craving arise? What are the signs of it? And what leads to that going away?
All
But
right.
how do I wisdom?
Here's the answer to that. Yes, we will do that soon enough. But it is very, very difficult to have insight and wisdom into, let us say, a particular situation if we are caught in the feelings of that situation. We must be in a state of satisfaction so that when that stuff arises, we can see it clearly rather than jumping in it.
Yeah.
That's the answer, is we want to get well schooled on being able to get the mind into a state of satisfaction and keep it there by keeping the hindrances away. Later, we'll start to look at a deeper way of talking about this, which is what is worthy of our attention now that we're able to manage and control our attention in the first jhana. What is it that's worthy of attention? The first answer is this is dukkha. So what that means is when something comes up, we can label that's dukkha. I see you, Mara. Now we're back in the loop, but it's the same thing. Now you can see it and recognize I don't want anything to do with it. That's the insight right there, is recognizing that dukkha. Now, here's the point, and that is that the dukkha is going to get more and more subtle. It's going to play in runs with you. It's going to make you think you've got it covered when in fact all you've done is taken the scab off a wound. Okay? So there's a lot of depth to it. But that investigation can only really be done when the mind is really fit for work. That's the reason why psychotherapy generally doesn't work, is because the psychotherapist delving in mind archaeology is not done with a mind that was fit for work. So they generally make a big mess out of it.
So, to a certain extent, once you get your mind very calm, you only have sukha. You can maintain it for like almost forever if you really wanted to, or for a lot of minutes or half an hour, so on. At that point, do you, in a controlled manner, do you allow these unwholesome stuff to emerge so that you can sort of note that it's happening and it's dukkha and it causes
No,
issues?
no, I would say instead at that level would be, can you get up, stand up, and maintain that position? Can you turn around and walk out of the room with that condition? How far can you walk away before you lose that samadhi or that state of satisfaction or the state of peace? In other words, how long after you get up before you lose control over it? It will generally happen the first time someone says something to you, and then bang, and you've lost it. But this is, in fact, you're asking that question, and what I just mentioned there fits directly into getting back into that condition every time you sit down in a chair, so that you're spending more and more time during your day. So that rather than looking for exalted states, you're looking for getting into a state that's just fine and just dandy and just good enough. And you can maintain that without getting stuck back into suffering and wanting things like exalted states.
But how does that tie into the final four steps of anapanasati, the ones that people say are related to insight practices?
We will do that. Absolutely. I just mentioned that we would. Yes, we will. We will investigate anicca. But in fact, if you think about it, you're already investigating anicca.
Yeah.
You already are seeing it. The mind gets stable, the mind gets rusty. The mind gets stable, the mind gets active. The mind gets stable. What is that? That's just anicca. Everything right. And yes, we will do anicca, dukkha, anatta, and we will do the trilokana, and also relate that to exactly how it works with the tetrad in the Anapanasati Sutta versus the four tetrad that's in the Satipatthana Sutta, because they're slightly different, but they're just different ways of looking at the same thing. But yes, this is definitely part of the practice, but it is always best done when the mind is fit for practice, when the mind is fit for work. So that's what we're working on now, is getting the mind fit for work and keeping it fit for work. And I congratulate you for the progress that you're making on that.
Thank you.
But that's the answer to your question. You ain't. Here's another way of answering your question. You ain't seen nothing yet. That's my favorite Buddhist joke.
Is that a joke? Are there layers to it?
Yes, there are layers to it, because you ain't seen nothing means you have not understood emptiness, or you have not seen sunyatata. You ain't seen nothing, which means you're still seeing things. But it's said in the other way of saying that you haven't seen something that there is. And what I'm actually saying is, no, you're still seeing things that don't exist. You ain't seen nothing yet.
Should I be? So the way to get the mind to fit seems to be, before doing these practices, insight practices, it seems to be getting it really tranquil and getting it really concentrated so that it does not get into the hindrances. One way of that would be increasing the time of the sit. Would another way be increasing the intensity of the jhana?
No. The frequency. That's what we want to intensify. Intensify the frequency. Every time you sit down in a chair, then you can expand it to every time you move your hands. Then you can continue to focus on the breath. Can I keep watching the breath while I'm doing whatever I'm doing? How often can I come back to the breath? They say that an individual, and this is most people, is about 14,000 breaths a minute or a day. I would say that offhand, a good meditators are down well under 10,000, probably down to about 5. But even at that rate, 5,000 breaths a day, how many of them are you going to be mindful of?
Small bit. But yeah, even if it's 10-20%, that's still a lot.
Yeah, we're improving. That's the whole point. And the answer to that question is how many breaths a day can you be aware of? The answer is everyone I think of, everyone that I can remember.
Yeah.
And so that's the way that we're practicing, is the frequency, not the intensity or the duration. Those were the two questions that you asked.
Yeah.
And the answer is frequency, over and over and over again. It's always a new now.
Because frequency is tied in with Sati, and that's what's needed to be really strong.
Right. Exactly.
Cool.
Excellent. These are really good questions you're asking.
Yeah. Thanks. Cool. What should be the next step? Maintaining Sati outside of the sit, right?
Yes.
Increasing the frequency.
Practicing it throughout the day.
Yeah. Does breath work as a good anchor? Because seems like it's pretty natural for me now, just being with the breath throughout everything.
Make special sure when you sit down in a chair that you're doing it full on. 3, 4, 5, 10 breaths. Take some time to do that. Okay. So that you wind up with 30 minutes a day of actual anapanasati. 60 times sitting down. That would be the way that I would do it. In that regard, I would add intensity. But it's not so much of it's not so much of intensity as it is making sure that you're covering all of the bases, which means gathering all the jhana factors together, of getting the hindrances out, getting your state into a self of satisfaction, taking a few deep breaths there. And once you get into a good feeling state of satisfaction and you're completely cooled down, only then will you turn to the keyboard or whatever reason that you sat down for, including a meal. So this could be almost a way of doing a silent prayer before you eat a meal. Think of it like that, of getting yourself really, really ready for whatever you're about to do. 60 times a day, woo, that's a lot of sati.
And maintaining these jhana factors also includes paying attention to the jhana factors, for example, piti and sukha, not just the breath, because that'll sort of get rid of them.
Right. Make sure that you're looking at how you feel, and how you feel is marvelous. A winner. A champion.
The emotional component of it as well.
Right, exactly.
Cool. I'll get back to you then. Let me start practicing.
This has been great. I've enjoyed this. Thank you. We'll see you later.
Thank you.